Greetings, maniacs, New Englanders, and everyone else tuning in. I hope this video finds you well. It's been a video bonanza for me here. I've been recording video after video, all on the same day. I will probably do question 3 tomorrow. I'm trying to do the rest all in one blitz. What do y'all think about the turtleneck? I know it's been out of style for a long time, but I saw it at Rennie's, and at my work, I have to worry about plasma burn and other kinds of mechanical UV burns. So I thought that this could be good for work. But before I wear it at work, I thought, why not accentuate this Maine shirt that I bought while I had my chickens butchered this past weekend, because that was also an ordeal and took longer than expected. This video, if you've been following along, we've been going through each question individually and in depth. So the in-depth the question we're going to go in depth with right now is question 6. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all of the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? Right off the bat, I just think yes. It's just in the printed version. It doesn't change anything legally. It's all already there. It's just so that it can actually be seen, so that it can be given the proper authority that it deserves. And as someone that went to Standing Rock in 2016 and into 2017, Native rights are high on my priority list, and we still have a pretty thriving community here in Maine, and I think that's incredible. So going right to Ballotpedia, because we all know how much I've been a proponent of this video series. Main question 6. The require Indian treaty obligations and other constitutional provisions included in official printed amendment is on the ballot in Maine as a legislatively referred constitutional amendment on November 7th. A yes vote supports requiring sections 1, 2, and 5 of Article X 10, which pertains to Maine Indian treaty obligations, to be included in official printed copies of the Maine Constitution by repealing Article X 10, Section 7. A no vote opposes requiring sections 1, 2, and 5 of Article X 10, which pertain to Maine Indian treaty obligations, to be included in official printed copies of the Maine Constitution by repealing Article X 10, Section 7. An overview. What amendments were omitted from appearing in the Constitution? Section 1, Section 2, and Section 5 of Article X of the Maine Constitution were omitted from appearing in the Maine Constitution with the passing of Article X, Section 7. Section 1, Section 2, and Section 5 were initially included in the Maine Constitution when the Constitution was adopted in 1820, after Maine became a state. Originally, Maine was part of Massachusetts, and in 1819, the Massachusetts General Court passed the Act of Separation, allowing people within the District of Maine to vote on independence. Voters approved, and Maine became an independent state. Maine held a constitutional convention in 1819 to draft a constitution. Voters approved the constitution in 1819, and it took effect on March 15th, 1820. Section 1 and Section 2 of Article X pertain to the date and time of the meeting of the first legislature in Maine, as well as the terms of the office holder, while Article X, Section 5 of the Maine Constitution incorporated the Act of Separation from Massachusetts, adopting parts of the Massachusetts Constitution. This included language pertaining to the Indian treaty obligations of Maine. However, Article X, Section 7 of the Constitution was adopted in 1876 after a statewide vote, which prohibited Sections 1, 2, and Section 5 of the Article X from appearing in printed versions of the Constitution, but allowed the text to remain valid. So again, this amendment, it's not an amendment. Well, okay, it is an amendment. It wouldn't change anything legally. It would only change what's printed, what is shown. Um, so, how would this amendment allow the omitted amendments to be included in the Constitution? This amendment would repeal Article X, Section 7 of the Maine Constitution. Article X, Section 7 of the Maine Constitution omitted Sections 1, 2, and 5 of Article X 10 from being included in any printed copies of the Constitution, but did not invalidate or impair the validity of those sections. Repealing Article 10, Section 7 would provide the Section 1, Section 2, and Section 5 to be included in any printed copies in the Constitution. What are the arguments for and against the amendment? Supporters of the amendment include Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, Maine Attorney General Aaron Frey, and Wabanaki Alliance, a coalition representing tribes in Maine, which include Micmac Nation, Holton Band of Malseet Indians, Passamaquoddy Tribe, and Penobscot Nation, in support of the amendment. Secretary Bellows said that the entire Maine Constitution should be printed and accessible to the public. I agree. Bellows said, "It is imperative to a fair and free democracy that our Constitution be printed in its entirety. To have any provision of the Constitution not printed but in full legal effect is antithetical to the entire premise of transparent government." I also agree. Making our state records, including the entire Maine Constitution, more easily accessible to the public and the people we serve is a cornerstone for an open and credible democracy. The Constitution is a bedrock upon which all Maine laws are built. No part of that Constitution should be hidden from the Mainers whose lives it affects every single day. Maine Governor Janet Mills opposes the amendment. What? In a testimony to the legislature, Gerald D. Reed, chief legal counsel of the governor's office, said amending the Constitution as these resolves propose, however, would be a mistake for two reasons. First, it appears to be a misguided attempt to right a historic wrong that never occurred. There is no factual basis for the proposition that the Articles of Separation were removed from printed copies of the Constitution as part of an effort to evade treaty obligations. Second, although the proposed constitutional amendment would have no legal effect, not everyone will understand that. It is foreseeable that some will wrongly believe that once again including the Articles of Separation and printed copies of the Constitution revitalizes 18th and 19th century treaty obligations. That is incorrect. Whether the Articles of Separation are included in printed copies of the Constitution is immaterial to the legal effect. They remain part of the Constitution today, just as they always have been. But more importantly, the rights and responsibilities of the state and the Wabanaki nations are not defined by treaties, but instead the state and federal statutes that codify the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement of 1980. As part of that settlement, Congress, with the tribe's consent, granted Maine a general discharge and release of any and all treaty obligations. 25 U.S.C. Section 1731. Any legislation that could be interpreted as invoking ancient treaties as the legal basis for modern obligations would be confusing and potentially destabilizing. It just seems like anytime Governor Janet Mills is involved, I am literally on the opposing side of the field. I thought she would have supported this. I'm confused. So, again, that was Ballotpedia. We're going to move on to the other part of Maine Public that I did not read in the last video, question 5, because this involves question 6. So, questions about November's ballot measures. The Political Pulse crew has some answers. Maine Public by Steve Missler and Kevin Miller. Maine voters will decide this November whether to reverse a nearly 150-year-old decision amid renewed discussion over tribal sovereignty and historic injustices against the Wabanaki Nation. On the surface, question 6 on the fall ballot simply asks whether voters support requiring that all of the provisions of the Maine Constitution be included in the official printed copies distributed by the state. That's because since 1876, printed copies of Maine's Constitution have omitted 3 sections of the original document, including one pertaining to Maine's treaty obligations toward Indian tribes. Sparse history evidence has led to a robust debate about whether the omission was merely a clerical effort to clean up Maine's founding document, or, as supporters suggest, an attempt to obfuscate the state's responsibility towards Wabanaki communities. Really quick, before Janet Mills in the Ballotpedia article that I was reading, Janet Mills said that it wasn't, that Maine didn't do anything wrong. And we may see that way. Maybe it wasn't intended that way. I will say the Wabanaki people have taken it that way, and I can understand where it's visible and in front of them, and they're like, okay, well, it's there. It's printed. It's part of it. Everyone knows it. Then it's taken away, and then you just want it brought back just to see it. I mean, it changes nothing, and then you're going to oppose that, and you're going to say that we did nothing wrong. Well, you standing against it now is doing something wrong. And so all right, so continuing. We have made some really great progress, so why not let these original treaty obligations be seen and printed? Lane Bryant, ambassador to the Penobscot Nation, told lawmakers during a public hearing on the proposed constitutional amendment. The fact that they were hidden sends a message to the tribal nations that the agreements and the relationships between the state and our governments and our people are not important and not worthwhile. I can totally understand where that's coming from. This is one of our 4 proposed constitutional amendments on the ballot this November, along with 4 citizen initiatives. We'll look at each of these amendments below, starting with question 6, and we'll tackle the ballot questions separately in later editions of the Pulse. Question 6, History and Transparency. Question 6 asks Maine voters, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? Before Maine achieved statehood in 1820, leaders in Massachusetts and the would-be states had to agree on Articles of Separation that were incorporated into Maine's brand new Constitution. Authors of a 2021 report for the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission wrote that the articles read more like a divorce judgment than a constitutional document because they dealt largely with practical details such as division of property. I'm going to make sure to include that below. I think that's important enough. I'll include that separately. But amid all the separation housekeeping was a section stating that Maine shall assume and perform all the duties and obligations of this Commonwealth, Massachusetts, towards the Indians within said District of Maine, whether the same arise from treaties or otherwise. In other words, any tribal treaties negotiated with Massachusetts would be transferred to Maine, and the fledgling state must honor those treaties plus any other obligations to the tribes. That language remains part of Maine's Constitution, but you'd never know it by reading the document. In 1875, the Maine legislature passed and the voters subsequently approved a constitutional amendment removing 3 sections from future printings of the document. 2 of those sections were clearly obsolete, but the amendment makes clear that Article 10, Section 5, which includes the state's obligations to the tribes, shall remain in full force, with the same effect as if contained in said printed copies. The reasoning behind this shift is murky 148 years later. Maine State Archivist Kate McBrien told lawmakers that the minutes of the meeting of the Constitutional Amendment Commission didn't record any debate or actual discussion on this particular altercation. The authors of the 2021 report to the Maine Indian State Tribal Commission attorneys Judson Etsy Kendall and Rachel Hampson theorized that the omission was reflectively of the official view largely held since statehood that the state's only obligations to tribal communities were those of guardian to ward. After all, Maine courts had repeatedly ruled that in land disputes, the claims of government and white settlers trumped any treaties with tribes. It is understandable to suspect that Maine's motive in removing the Section 5 language was to hide its treaty obligations, Etsy Kendall and Hampson wrote. However, to put it bluntly, the Maine government did not believe that it had any obligations to hide. And Janet Mills kind of solidified that by saying what she did. Conspiracy afoot. But in a fall 2021 research paper in Maine History, the Journal of the Maine Historical Society, historian Catherine Burns argued the omission was an attempt to hide Maine's obligations. Pulling that up really quickly. Yes, I think that is definitely something. I'm going to include it. I don't know how much access you and I will have to it, but it'll be there. Burns noted the Maine Supreme Judicial Court was poised to side with a white resident, Joseph Granger, in a decades-long land claim fight with the Passamaquoddy tribe over 15 islands in St. Croix River. Maine state government was still knee-deep in Civil War debt, and now the state faced the possibility of having to both pay Granger's legal fees and to compensate the Passamaquoddy tribe for the lost land under Article 10, Section 5. According to Burns, Governor Nelson Dingley appointed a close associate of Granger to the commission working to clean up Maine's constitution. That former partner, Frederick Pike, then successfully proposed omitting Section 5 from future printing. Lastly, all of this was happening at the same time that the Supreme Court was finalizing its ruling in Granger's favor. Documentation concerning the redaction is thin, but it was convenient for the state that the redaction took effect in time for Maine to avoid compensating the tribe and paying Granger's damages, Burns wrote in Maine History. With Article 10, Section 5 out of sight, Maine managed to dodge both outlays and ignored advocates for the tribe who refused to turn a blind eye to Article 10, Section 5 in the aftermath of Granger versus Avery. Sure enough, Maine state government never reimbursed the Passamaquoddies and actually siphoned off money from a Passamaquoddy trust fund to pay Granger. But Burns' theory isn't embraced by everyone. Responding to her work, Etsy Kendall and Hampson reiterated that the state did not need a nefarious motive for redaction because Maine courts didn't recognize tribal land claims, and the administration of Government Janet Mills, which opposes amending the Constitution, resumed printing the omitted sections, characterized the proposal as a misguided attempt to right a historic wrong that never occurred. So now Maine voters will get to decide this fall, 148 years after parts of the Constitution were suppressed, whether to bring back those sections back to life on the printed page. To me, it doesn't matter what happened 148 years. Well, okay, I can't say that. It does matter what happened 148 years ago. But it doesn't impact what decisions I have or will make. Like, I'm not responsible for those things back then. What I am responsible for is right now. And right now, it seems like we need to right this wrong, where it is official. Why is it not printed? Why is it not transparent? Why can we not see it? I think that, to me, it doesn't make any sense at all to fight against it. So, I'm gonna read another part of NG Exchange. I read the opening part in the last video, so I'm gonna skip that this time. I'm gonna just kind of break down a little bit more, and then I'll leave you with one more article from Bangor Daily News. That is not an opinion piece, but an opinion contributor. That's what it's called. So written by an opinion contributor. So from NG Exchange, question 6, text on the ballot. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all of the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? needed it bigger so I could see easier. Background from the League of Women Voters. Since 1875, 3 sections of Maine's Constitution have not been included when copies are printed. One of the sections refers to Maine's tribal obligations. Do you want to amend the Constitution so these sections are included in print? This does not change the Constitution, only which parts of it are printed. A yes vote means you agree that we should print all the sections of Maine state constitution. A no vote means that you support keeping these sections of the Constitution out of printed copies. The history of this issue isn't clear, but most importantly, this would not change treaty obligations in any way. It only applies to whether they're included in print. From the League of Women Voters of Maine Guide to the November Ballot Questions. Context from the Bangor Daily News. This came out of a larger sovereignty push from Maine tribes, with one proponent saying it would unerase part of the state's history. It is unknown why lawmakers in the Reconstruction era decided to take away treaty obligations out of print. They were extracted alongside antiquated items and changes amid an increasing readability of the document. I'm just learning how to read myself, folks. I've also been reading out loud for, I think, a couple hours now, which is good. I need to work on this, but I can also kind of hear my voice going. The proposed law and the legislation action, LD 78, resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Maine to require all provisions in the Constitution to be included in the official printing. And then there's one more article. I'm not going to read it. Voting yes on question 6 would restore the soul of Maine by an opinion contributor, Jason Grunstorm Whitney, who is a member of Wabanaki Alliance. And it was posted on October 18th. It's an interesting read, and it gives you an opinion or a perspective from someone from the Wabanaki people. So I highly encourage you to read that. And I'll include all the links of everything below. I don't understand why Governor Janet Mills is opposing it. I mean, she offered some reasoning. It just, I guess I don't understand still. So this has been a reading of question 6 on Maine's November ballot 2023. Question 6 once again says, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all of the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? So once again, I've been going in deep independently with each question, trying to flesh it all out and get to the bottom of what each of these mean. And I hope you've enjoyed coming along with me, learning a little bit more with me. If you haven't already, go ahead and listen to 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way down. I mean, if you are just interested in specific ones, I know question 3 is a doozy of a question with a lot to it. All these questions, honestly, are interconnected, and having now spent many hours reading all of them, I'm starting to learn that Maine people are kind of in over their head this voting season, and it almost seems intentional. So I hope that you've enjoyed me bringing some of this to light. Go ahead and share this with your friends, family, neighbors, just people in general that want to know more about the questions on the ballot in just a handful of days. If you like this video, please like it, please subscribe, and leave some comments down below. I like hearing both critical and positive feedback. So until next time, I hope you all have a great day.